Oh, hi. Good morning. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us today for this talk with Gavin and David. They are going to talk about AWS and different ways to use Alfresco in AWS. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Hello. Good morning. My name's Gavin Cornwell. I'm one of the founding engineers at Alfresco, so been here forever, and joined today by David Wright from AWS. I'm going to take you through 5 different ways of using AWS with Alfresco. So what we're going to have a talk about today is quick starts, show you what we're doing with those, easy way to deploy stuff. And then we're going to go on and have a look at Kubernetes, some of the stuff that we're going to move towards, as Brian mentioned earlier today. And then looking at some of the serverless extensions, the whole idea around the out-of-process stuff and how we can use serverless for that. Online trials, something that we allow you to do, have trial environments. We're going to have a quick look at how we do that, and finish off with gathering statistical data from the products. So let's start with quick starts. So what is an AWS quick start? Well, it's a way of quickly and easily deploying software by following architectural best practices at AWS, tell you how to do things. So there's guidelines of being up and running in less than an hour, and they're really useful for migrating systems to AWS and just for general experimentation. There's a whole suite of quick starts out there, so there's all sorts of different systems that you can load up, and Alfresco are lucky enough to have one of those on the quick start page, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And as we heard this morning, Thomas saying about time to value. So this does really reduce time to value because it's a one-click install. You don't have to do all of the linking up of all the different components. Really easy to do. So as I mentioned, we have one for content services. It's based on the ACS 5.2.1 AMI that's in the marketplace. So if you want, you can just go and deploy that all on its own without the quick start, but you lose a lot of the load balancing and all that, which we'll take a look at in a second. It deploys in about 45 minutes. You can deploy it into new VPCs or into existing VPCs. It includes the S3 connector. It's already in there and configured and ready to push stuff into S3 buckets. And as with all quick starts, it's developed in conjunction with AWS Solutions Architect. So they take a look at what you do, and it sort of goes through like an app store approval process. So you know that what's out there has been verified. And it produces a production-capable clustered environment for ACS. Let's have a quick look at that. So you can see it follows all the standard guidelines for VPC. So you have your private and public subnets. The only thing that's public is the Bastion host, so you have to SSH into the system via that. So it follows all the best security practices. As I mentioned, it's all scalable. So all the servers are inside an auto-scaling group, all behind a load balancer. RDS instances, which are multi-region, multi-AZ, I should say, and then the S3 bucket for storing content. So all of that is set up with just a one-click deploy. So let's have a quick look. Hopefully this one's live as well. Okay, so if you go to the quick start page, you'll get a whole catalog, like I mentioned. If you click on the Alfresco one, you'll see something similar to this. Oh, sorry. I forgot to do the mirroring. There we go. Yep. So you'll see this screen here. You get a button up here to deploy into a new VPC, or there's a link under here to go into an existing VPC. So that takes you to the standard CloudFormation page, if you're familiar with that. So let's have a look. I wanted to just go quickly through this page, show you how configurable this is. So all those availability zones and load balancers, all of the VPCs, the CIDR addresses that you use for your private and public subnets, all configurable up front. There's some defaults in there, obviously. And the CIDR that you need to access your Bastion host, something you specify yourself, so you can tie that down to your environment, make that as secure as you want. Obviously, you need key pairs so that you can get access to the systems that get deployed. You can choose the sizes of your instances for the Alfresco servers and for the index servers and the Bastion. Admin password, obviously, and the only prerequisite is that you need to have a license file because this does deploy an enterprise version. So you have to have a license that you can point to, and that needs to be publicly available. So putting that into an S3 bucket is an easy way of doing that. And then you can configure the size of your auto-scaling groups here, so how many nodes you start with as a minimum, how many you can go to as a maximum. An email address for any messages back from Alfresco for scaling events and stuff like that. And then again, for the RDS, you can choose the instance size. So very, very configurable. And the other thing I wanted to point out in here, if you go to the advanced page, on the rollback on failure, this is where tip, if you're going to experiment with this stuff, if things roll back by default, so if something goes wrong, it will just start rolling back and then you won't be able to investigate. So one tip is to change that to no, so that you can carry on. You can have a look at what got created and see what the problems might be. So I'm not going to, you can see that was really quick to fill that in, but I'm not going to press create there because it will take 45 minutes. And we haven't got that, well, we have got that long, but I'm sure you don't want to sit here waiting for that. So here's one I did earlier. You can see here the stack name. And what we actually do is follow best practices by reusing some of the stacks that AWS provide. So if you're familiar with CloudFormation, you can have what's called nested templates. So we call out to the AWS VPC and Bastion templates. So we know that's going to create you an environment that's been blessed by AWS and follows all the best practices. And then all the Alfresco stuff is done in its own stack as another nested stack. So the end of that gives you access to a system. So you can see here that we've got the load balancer fronted by fronts the system. So you can go /Alfresco to get to the repo, /share to get to the server. And you can see here we've got a cluster enabled with two servers. Let's go back to the slides. Okay. Thank you. So that's the ACS side. We've also got one coming soon for process services. So it's not quite ready yet. Like I say, there's that review process. It's still going through that, tweaking and making changes. But again, very similar to the ACS one, APS has an AMI available in the marketplace. This stack deploys in 25 minutes, and again, new or existing VPCs, you can choose that. And again, developed in conjunction with AWS solutions architects. So as you can see from the last one, very, very similar approach, just deploy an APS in there instead of ACS. If you want to get a bit more information, obviously there's a ton more you can look at there, and the auto scaling and the all the configuration options that we looked at. There's another session tomorrow called Alfresco on AWS Cloud. That's being hosted by another AWS employee. So I highly recommend you go to that because he's going to deep dive into the template and the ACS QuickStart and play around with the auto scaling and all that. So that would be a good session to attend. And recently there was a Tech Talk Live done going through both ACS and APS in a little bit more detail. So that's worth a watch there. And then I've just put on there for reference the QuickStart pages, which I showed you a second ago. The APS one's not live yet. Once it goes live, then obviously that will work. So there are a couple of things to look out for with using CloudFormation templates. So the top tip there I just told you about, rollback on failure, is a good one if you're experimenting and making changes. Sometimes things fail to provision because of limits in your account. And VPCs, for example, you only have 5 by default, and elastic IPs. So they can run out quite quickly if you've got several people trying these stacks in your account. So that's one thing to look out for. And if you use an SSO, I mean at Alfresco we have Okta. When you go in with the Okta, the role doesn't have enough permissions to create some of the resources that you have in the template. So that can be a problem. One of the ways that that can be solved is with service catalog. And that's what David's going to spend some time talking to us about.
Thank you. So Service Catalog is a service that is already incorporated into the AWS console. Just a show of hands if anyone has actually used it. That's about what I thought. It's a little known service that actually is divided into 2 components. So there is an administrative component and a user component. And what that does is it gives you the ability as an administrator, excuse my teeth, to create both products and portfolios. And then around those products and portfolios, you can then share those with your user set and your user base. The users get to see that through a completely different front end, which can also be under its own FQDN, and also customized heavily around what the look and feel is as well. So you can customize how that presents. And we've seen in APAC, in the region that I represent, a lot of use both internally and externally for partners. So what partners tend to do is look at ways to create a set of standardized products, and those products can be very much similar to how the Alfresco one is built out there. So you can leverage QuickStarts and build a baseline products where those products create best practices, leveraging AWS templates, for example, to create standard environments that you know that you can then deploy into. And using that concept of the nested stack, you can then actually then build out different elements to actually create usable products that your customers and your user base want to use. So it's a very powerful way of being able to put together a set of solutions that give users the feel that they are actually self-serving and that they are completely choosing what they want to do, but you have put a whole bunch of control and governance around those products. So part of the format within Service Catalog is the ability to actually apply constraints. So those constraints can be both either a launch constraint, so to get around some of those permission elements, for example, you can allow admin rights at launch for those services to actually be able to run on those products. You can put instance constraints, for example. So if this is a set of scenarios where you're looking to have users run within a dev environment and you want to control the costs, you can actually put constraints where they can only launch T2 and free tier instances. And by doing that, you can obviously put really strong controls around what you want to use. So the analogy that I always like to use is the fact that you're effectively taking Service Catalog, which is a toolbox, and within that toolbox, you're putting all of the different tools that the users will need to solve their problems. But you're only giving or letting them take the tools out one at a time, and you're putting really detailed instructions around how they can use that tool. So they can't take the hammer and try and tighten the nuts with it. So it prevents people from actually breaking things. So if we look at some of the standard key benefits, one of the things that obviously is that this helps enforce is standardization. And Service Catalog is really good in being able to create these standard environments. So within the Service Catalog portfolio, you can do things like stacking the environments. So, for example, you could take the Alfresco component, which you may want to deploy into an existing VPC. that existing VPC, there is a QuickStart called the Variable Network Architecture, I think it's called, which creates a baseline best practice around a VPC. So security groups, multi-AZ, scalability. And you can then customize that using that same kind of format that you saw with the customization and parameters that you want to put into it. So you can take that as a baseline product. You can create your own best practice for your environment. So this is the standard environment that you want to deploy to, and actually push that out. That then becomes the baseline that everybody has to run. And one of the things that we've seen is the ability to enforce tagging. So with Service Catalog, we have the option to be able to create a tag library. So that tag library is a way of creating a whole bunch of standardized resources that that define either cost centers or working environments or some standardized tagging mechanism that you want to enforce across the organization. I've seen an interesting example where a customer has actually used that as a way of enforcing standardization. So what they did is they took the tag library, they created a whole set of standardized tags for business and BU. Anyone launching an environment had to have the environment tagged correctly. If it didn't, there was a Lambda function that they run that actually went through and matched the tags. If it didn't match any of the predefined tags, it actually brought the environment down. And so they went from what they said was a non-compliant environment standard to a standardized environment in 2 weeks, because everyone got sick of having to go back and rebuild their stack because they hadn't tagged it properly. So there's a really strong element of being able to put enforcement and controls and make sure that you can create standardization, billing constraints, and all of those elements that you need to control. The other really useful part with Service Catalog is the fact that once you've created a portfolio, that portfolio becomes then a repeatable piece of infrastructure that you can reuse. So as we see more and more infrastructure as code, as we see more and more move to creating repeatable and automated components, so this ability to put that code and that basically CloudFormation templates somewhere that is usable becomes more and more important. And Service Catalog fundamentally leverages CloudFormation. So the products that you create are a CloudFormation. How you build those CloudFormations can be, as I say, multi-stack, nested. You can pull products in from Marketplace if you need to use commercial software. If you're looking to create, if you have a standard security environment, for example, that you have a standardized firewall product that you use, we have most of the top firewall vendors in there. You can pull it in, you can create that standard environment. But around that, once you've then created it, you can then share that across either accounts or different portfolios. So it means that, once again, you have this ability to build once and repeat multiple times, which gives a lot of flexibility around for you and to actually be able to reduce your time of having to do things by being able to leverage repeatable pieces of work and trying to automate as much as possible. So, thanks.
Thanks, David. So that's a little bit about what we're doing today. Now a little bit about where we're going in the future. So show of hands, how many people have heard of Kubernetes? Thought it might be like that.
More than Service Catalog.
More than Service Catalog, yeah. So yeah, I mean, Kubernetes has been a big thing in the press the last year. So as Brian said earlier, it's a direction that we're starting to look at. So what is Kubernetes, if you've not heard of it? So it's an orchestration engine originally created by Google. It was an internal tool they had, and they open sourced. It promotes infrastructure as code, so everything you deploy, you write down in a descriptor file, which obviously then can be source controlled and versioned. And it essentially manages all the deployed artifacts, so it decides within the cluster what goes where onto what node and manages scaling operations and stuff. So it takes a lot of the pain away from you. So same deployment anywhere is a big key thing with Kubernetes. So you can do your descriptor files, and you know that should deploy in various environments. So whether that's locally for local development on Minikube, or whether it's a cloud vendor, it should deploy the same way. And of course, it's had massive adoption recently. Every single multiple vendor, I think, has announced support last year for Kubernetes. So EKS was announced at reInvent last year, from Amazon. That's not available yet, so as soon as it is, that will be something we're switching to. But for now, we've been setting up our clusters with COPS on AWS. It seems to be the standard way of doing stuff. So just a little bit of an overview of what Kubernetes is. This is what a node looks like, some of the concepts. So you have a pod, which gets deployed, and that can contain one or more containers and volumes. And you have something called kubelet running in the background, which does all the processing. And of course, this is heavily reliant on Docker. Everything's Docker containers. So I wanted to share a little bit here about where we're going and what we're doing at the moment. So as Brian said earlier, this is a journey, and this is the very, very first step of the journey. So all those bits to deploy are in the Kubernetes way. There's lots of little files that you need to deploy. So there's a nice packaging technology called Helm, and you package up all these things that you want to deploy into things called charts. So what we're aiming to do is provide you with charts that you can use, and there's also a growing ecosystem of charts from various members of different organizations. So for example, Postgres here, we're just reusing one of the stable Postgres charts. We didn't create that ourselves. So the goal, at the moment, we've got a digital business platform chart, and all that is something that's dependent on a process services chart, a content services chart, and a sync service chart. So very much like Maven with dependencies, you can have the same sort of thing with Helm. Obviously, we need containers. So we had some containers, and lots of people in the community had created some containers as well, but everyone had done everything differently, and we had different naming conventions, different approaches. So one of the things we're trying to do is standardize, certainly internally across all our projects, all our different teams, and also have common building blocks. So you can see down here the Alfresco-based Java container is the one that everything's going to go build upon, basically. That gives us some advantages that if the security updates need to be made to that particular container, it's just done in one place, and all teams benefit from that. So again, very early in the journey, but wanted to share where we were. So as part of that process, we've come up with some guidelines for creating Docker images internally, and the Helm charts and processes that we need to follow, how to set up Kubernetes clusters, etc. So there's a repo there on GitHub, which was opened up to public a couple of weeks ago. So we'd love feedback on that. If you've got experience of creating containers and Helm charts and some things you can share with us, that would be great. So the ultimate goal, like I say, is to be able to just type Helm install Alfresco DBP and you get everything, a bit like with the QuickStart. So all of that work we're doing at the moment in this GitHub repo, it's not quite public yet, will be soon, so I wanted to put it in here for you to keep an eye on. So keep looking for that. And if you want to have a look, you'll know a bit more about what we're doing here, including live demo. Sergio, I think I can see sitting at the back there. He's doing a talk straight after this one, I believe. So I'd highly recommend you go and look at that one. Okay, let's switch to serverless. So what is serverless? I'm sure everyone's heard of that. It's a bit of a buzzword, or is it? It was definitely a main theme last year at reInvent. And I think it's got a lot of traction, and there's a lot of future in serverless. Fortunately, it has a little bit of an unfortunate name because, of course, there's servers. You just don't have to manage them. And another unfortunate thing in my mind is that serverless often gets compared with, or functions as a service is serverless. But to me, that's not quite true. I like to sum it, I think this quote was sort of sums it up the best. A serverless solution is one that costs you nothing to run if nobody is using it. And that was by Paul Johnson. He was a big advocate for serverless and has actually just been hired by AWS as a serverless advocate. And I think some of the stuff that we're doing with the DBP and the out-of-process extensions, serverless is a perfect fit for that. So what Brian was talking about earlier about safe for upgrades and you having a public API and event gateway as a contract to you, just dealing with that. is a much safer way, and the whole thing around different life cycles as well. Ray, our platform services architect, has got a session tomorrow on the digital business platform extensions. Again, as another highly recommended one to go to see how we're planning to do that. And as Brian mentioned, demos around Kafka and stuff. So I thought it would be quite useful. Obviously, we don't have an event gateway yet. I thought it would be quite useful to do a POC on the using serverless. This is an excuse to learn some stuff as well. Try and do that with some of the technology that we have today. So you've probably seen from some of my blog posts recently, I reused the events within the system that we use for desktop sync and plugged in a camel route so that we could fire off all those events into Firehose, and came up with a very simple insurance company use case where people would upload images of stuff that had been stolen. We try and recognize what was in the images, and like claim adjusters uploading their notes and trying to use comprehend to pick stuff out from the document, as we'll see now. Let's do the mirroring this time. Okay. So I'm going to start by uploading a couple of files, hopefully. So firstly, my favorite car, and then a text file, which is a very, very simple claim adjuster report. Someone just saying, my name's Jay Bloggs, I visited certain place on a certain date, and please confirm this is a valid claim. So you can probably see what we're going to try and do with that. So let me upload those. And while that's processing, I thought I'd just go through the architecture that we're using here. So as I mentioned, in the repository, we're using a camel route to send all of the events that we get through ActiveMQ straight out to Firehose. And then using a Lambda as part of the Firehose to do some filtering of the events. So all events are getting sent to Firehose, but then we filter out just looking for images and text files, and drop in all of the events that are not around creating of nodes of those types. Everything that's accepted as a record gets pushed into an S3 bucket, and then we use a Lambda function which is triggered off that S3 bucket when a new object arrives. That file is essentially a representation of all the events that happened that we've accepted, so all of the images and the text files. And for each of those events, we kick off a step function, which is a way of orchestrating Lambda functions and bringing them together to produce some a very basic workflow, essentially. So the first Lambda function goes off and uses the V1 REST API to go and grab content and puts it in an S3 bucket. And as part of that process, we work out whether it's a text file or an image and set a flag appropriately, which then tells step functions whether to call the process image Lambda or the process text Lambda. If we do image, then obviously we go through recognition and do some entity detection. Or we go through comprehend, which does looks for entities within the text and also does a sentiment analysis. Those two build up some metadata that we then use in the last Lambda function to call a V1 REST API to go and update the metadata. So hopefully, if the demo gods are with us today, in the background, that step function should have executed twice. So you see here 1128. So let's take a look at this one first. So the nice thing about step functions is you get this graphical view as to what happened, and it shows red if the step failed, or green if it succeeded. You also got a nice view over here of the inputs and the outputs as it goes through the step function. So you can see here this is the raw Alfresco event. Again, as I said earlier, disclaimer, this is not a public thing, this is just something to get going with. And then the output of that particular step builds up some metadata down here. So this is going to call the V1 REST API and change the type of the node to an insurance claim report. So this was obviously the text file. We just generate a random ID. You can see here we've picked out Joe Bloggs as a name. Location is the street, and there's a visit date in there as well. And then there's a follow-up flag. That's using the sentiment analysis. So how did we do that? So the other nice thing here about step functions shows you every single step and what happened. And you can click on go straight to the logs for the Lambda function that got executed. So let's have a look in here. So you can see here that we sent off that to comprehend, and it's come back and said that it's found a person entity, which was Joe Bloggs, a location entity, which was the address, and a date entity, which is obviously the date. And then we send it off here, not that one. Send it off to sentiment analysis. And here, just looking basically, comparing the positive versus the negative. So the positive sentiment was slightly higher than negative, so that's using that to set the flag. So obviously a very simple use case, but hopefully sparks some ideas. And if we then go back, look at the other one. Thank you. So this went through the other branch, obviously, went through to the image. Similar input, but this time the output, again, we're creating some metadata. Going to set this one to insurance claim image, custom type, again, random ID. And here again, we've worked out that was actually a car. And a similar thing again, we can look at the log files for the Lambda function that run. If the Wi-Fi doesn't cut out on us. Typical, isn't it? Every time I've done this test, it's worked fine. Okay, well, let's go back over here for a second. If we go back over into Alfresco, hopefully. It's Wi-Fi, isn't it? Backup plan. So here you can see this is the output that we would have got from recognition. So it just gives you back a bunch of labels of things that it thinks it sees in that image. We were just looking for car in there, and let's just play this hopefully. So when we went back over into share, you can see here that the metadata got updated by that callback to the REST API, and we've set the claim type to car. If we go back and then look at the report, very similar thing again. We just see that the metadata's been set. Okay, let's go back to the safety of slides. Thank you. So yeah, just put this in here again just to show again the whole flow that we've gone through from end to end. So using this whole out of process extension thing, we've pushed out stuff to Amazon, and then round trip back updating Alfresco. So hopefully that sparks some imagination and give me feedback on my blog posts and stuff if you want me to try other things, or if you want to have a go yourself. You can have a look at my repos there. The whole thing deployed within a CloudFormation template, so it's really easy to get going, and all the instructions are in there in the blog post and the repos. So another area that's quite fun to play with, I sort of class under serverless, is Alexa. And again at reInvent, Alexa for Business was announced. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more Alexas in the office. So why not voice control Alfresco? It's quite a fun thing to do. One of our architects, Greg Milan, created a project a while ago which sort of started this process. You could ask various things of Alfresco. So there's a GitHub repo there if you want to have a play with that. Gavin actually demoed that at DevCon last year. Well, I wasn't brave enough to demo Alexa. I'm glad I didn't. So there's a link there for his demo at DevCon. And another thing we do internally, we have a really nice marketing demo which uses Alexa. And it also ties together all the services, ACS, APS, and ADF. So you use Alexa to kick off a vehicle service booking demo. And it takes you through a whole thing around sentiment analysis as well. So it's worth checking out that. So other ideas. So that ingestion pipeline that I showed you, there's all sorts of stuff we could do there. I did a very, very basic example, obviously, but you can imagine integrating Lex and Poly for audio stuff or recognition video that just got announced. Transcribe, there's all sorts of services that Amazon have recently announced that you could sort of plug into that extendable ingestion pipeline. Another alternative approach, rather than using all that pushing stuff out through events, something I've been playing with recently is the idea of just having a core repository action, which you can use to call a Lambda function. So a bit similar to what Brian was talking about earlier with the function registry, sort of an early version of that, if you like. So something we would provide that allows you to call a Lambda function, which you can then do your processing in. So get a similar effect to what we just did. So if you keep an eye on that GitHub repo, I was working on that as part of the hackathon yesterday. And one of the things I'm really excited about is the serverless application repository, which got announced recently as well. This is going to be almost like an app store for serverless apps. So again, using CloudFormation, you can package up little apps. So this pipeline that I showed you, we could build those and publish those into the application repository and have people just download them. So you could do that for your customers, for example, if you've got customizations that you're building. So I think that's really exciting, that bit. So keep an eye on that as well for ideas. If you use QuickStart, for example, with our S3 connector, or even on-prem, we support now, you can use S3 as your content store. There's potential, lots of potential we can do there with your content in S3, a lot of services that we can take advantage of. So cost savings is one of the big ones. So analysing how much the content's accessed and what stuff could be moved to infrequent access to save you costs, or even Glacier. So that's something that I'm going to continue looking at and researching. And then some exciting stuff around Macy as well, being able to have Macy look through all your content and look for personal identifiable information, for example, and have that flagged, and then have that be flagged in Alfresco with an aspect, for example. Using comprehend over a whole bucket like we just looked at, but on a larger scale. And some of the select stuff, S3 select, being able to query your content. Loads and loads of ideas around S3, so exciting area to be in. Okay, so let's take a look at the online trial stuff in the last few minutes. So this is an event-driven serverless architecture that we've put together. So it's triggered from the Try Now button on alfresco.com. So if you go and sign up for a trial, we're actually running this under the covers. It's all integrated with our Marketo system. And essentially, we have a pool of environments just ready to go to be allocated to customers as they want to trial stuff. It allocates an environment to a customer and then sends them an email, stores the stuff in Marketo. This is a picture of the architecture. So it's very, like I say, event-driven, serverless, APIs going in, calling Lambda functions and triggering SQS messages to follow the whole pipeline, and having Lambda functions triggered from CloudWatch alarms. One of the big advantages of this has been a massive cost savings. You haven't got, we go back to that quote earlier, you haven't got stuff sitting around just idling and not paying for stuff that's not doing anything. So we've seen a big cost saving by doing this. So why tell you about this? Well, it's been open sourced as well. So this is all something you can go and have a look at. So if you're a partner, for example, and setting up environments for your customers, maybe this is something that you would be beneficial to you. So take a look at that GitHub repo there. And again, Martin Whittington, colleague of mine, spoke about this, a lightning talk in Beacon, so a link to his YouTube video there. And then finally, gathering statistical data. So the other way that we're using AWS services, you may know if you've been an Alfresco enterprise customer, we had something called Heartbeat. So this is the replacement for the Heartbeat architecture. So again, another serverless approach. So we want to improve the product by collecting and analyzing anonymized usage data. I want to highlight that. It's anonymized. There's no customer information in there at all. One of the things we've done up till now, it's only been in enterprise, and obviously it's been opt-out via the license. But we're adding it to community as well, because we want to try and get a lot more data, see what features people are using, for example. Of course, it's opt-out, and it'll be much easier to do that than it is today. And it will be easy to view the data that we actually send, and it will be easy to delete, to disable the data on a fairly granular level. So we'd love feedback on that and what you're comfortable with being shared. So if you get Richard Esplin is the product manager for the repo side, so I'm sure he'd love to hear feedback on that particular subject. So just an overview of the architecture that we're using there. So we've got a couple of Lambda functions fronted by API gateway, and the repos essentially push data to those. So we're going to also retrofit the old legacy stuff. So repos that are sending Heartbeat data to the legacy endpoint will also go through this new system. And again, get pushed through Kinesis Firehose. That data then there's a Lambda function in there which gives us a chance to do some pre-processing of that data if required. And it all ends up in Elasticsearch, so we can run Kibana on top of that and do analysis and the whole sort of big data kind of stuff. That's it. Thank you.